Ah, the theater. Grease paint and cabaret. But it's not so much fun if you happen to be the one in charge of the bloody thing. A Matter Means by P.J. Wodehouse. Part 3. The episode of the theatrical venture. Read by Karl. It was one of those hard, nubbly rolls. The best restaurants charge you sixpence for having the good sense not to eat them. It hit Roland Bleak with considerable vehemence on the bridge of the nose. For the moment, Roland fancied the roof of the Regent grill room must have fallen in, and as this would automatically put an end to the party, he was not altogether sorry. He had never been to a theatrical supper party before, and within 5 minutes of his arrival at the present one, he had become afflicted with an intense desire never to go to one again. To be such of these gay gatherings, one must possess dash, and Roland, whatever his other sterling qualities, was a little short of dash. The young man on the other side of the table was quite nice about it. While not actually apologizing, he went so far as to explain that it was old Jerry we had in mind when he started to roll in its course. After a glance at old Jerry, a chinish child of about 19, Roland felt it would be churlish to be angry with a young man whose intentions had been so wholly admirable. Old Jerry had one of those faces in which any alteration, even the comparatively limited one which a role would be capable of producing, was bound to be for the better. He smiled a sickly smile and said it didn't matter. The charming creature who sat on his assailant's left, however, took a more serious view of the situation. "Sidney, you make me tired," she said severely. "If I had thought you didn't know how to act as a gentleman, I wouldn't have come here with you. Go away somewhere and throw bread yourself, and ask Mr. Beak to come sit by me. I want to talk to him." That was Roland's first introduction to Miss Billy Fairpoint. "I've been wanting to have a chat with you all the evening, Mr. Bleak," she said, as Roland blushingly sank into the empty chair. "I've heard such a lot about you." What Miss Fairpoint had heard about Roland was that he had £200,000 and apparently did not know what to do with it. "In fact, if I hadn't been told you would be here, I shouldn't have come to this party. Can't stand these gatherings of nuts in May as a general rule. They bore me stiff." Roland hastily revised his first estimate of the theatrical profession. Shallow, empty-headed creatures some of them might be, no doubt, but there were exceptions. Here was a girl of real discernment, a thoughtful student of character. A girl who understood that a man might sit at a supper party without uttering a word and might still be a man of parts. "I'm afraid you'll think me very outspoken, but that's me all over. As my friends say, Billy Fairpoint's a funny girl. She likes anyone, she just tells them so straight out. She doesn't dislike anyone, she tells them straight out, too." "And a very admirable trait," said Roland enthusiastically. Miss Fairpoint sighed. "Perhaps it is," she said pensively. "But I'm afraid it's what's kept me back in the profession. Managers don't like it. They think girls should be seen and not heard." Roland's blood boiled. Managers were plainly a dastardly crew. "But what's the good of worrying?" went on Miss Fairpoint with a brave but hollow laugh. "Of course it's wearing, having to wait when one's got as much ambition as I have. But the ultimate my chance is bound to come some day." The intense mournfulness of Miss Fairpoint's expression seemed to indicate she anticipated the arrival of the desired day not less than 60 years hence. Roland was profoundly moved. His chivalrous nature was up in arms. He fell to wondering if he could do anything to help this victim of managerial unfairness. "You don't mind me going on about my troubles, do you?" asked Miss Fairpoint. "Once Hosella meets anybody really sympathetic." Roland babbled fervent assurances, and she pressed his hand gratefully. "What if you care to come to tea one afternoon?" she said. "Oh, rather," said Roland. He would have liked to put it in a more polished way, but he was almost beyond speech. "Of course I know what a busy man you are." "No, no." "Well, I shall be tomorrow afternoon, if you care to look in." Roland bleated gratefully. "I'll write down the address for you," said Miss Fairpoint, suddenly businesslike. Exactly when he committed himself to the purchase of the Windsor Theatre, Roland could never say. The idea seemed to come into existence fully grown, without preliminary discussion. One moment it was not, the next it was. His recollections of the afternoon which he spent drinking lukewarm tea and punctuating Miss Fairpoint's flow of speech with yeses and nos was always so thoroughly confused he never even knew whose suggestion it was. The purchase of a West End theatre, when one has the necessary cash, is not nearly such a complicated business as a layman might imagine. Roland was staggered by the rapidity with which the transaction was carried through. Theater was his before he had time to realize he had never meant to buy the thing at all. He gone to the offices of Mr. Montague with the intention of making an offer for the lease for, say, 6 months. And the wizard, in the space of less than an hour, had not only induced him to sign mysterious documents which made him sole proprietor of the house, but left him with the feeling that he had done an extremely acute stroke of business. Mr. Montague had dabbled in many professions in his time, from street peddling upward, but what he was really best at was hypnotism. Although he felt, after the spell of Mr. Montague's magnetism was withdrawn, rather like a nervous man who had been given a large baby to hold by a strange woman who was promptly vanished round the corner, Rowan was to some extent consoled by the praise bestowed upon him by Miss Verpoint. She said it was much better to buy a theatre than rent it, because then you escaped the heavy rent. It was specious, but Rowan had a dim feeling there was a flaw somewhere in the reasoning. It was from this point that a shadow may be said to have fallen upon the brightness of the venture. It would have been even less self-congratulatory if he had known the Windsor Theatre's reputation. Being a comparative stranger in the metropolis, he was uttered its nickname in theatrical circles was the Mug's Graveyard, a title which had been bestowed upon it not without reason. Built originally by a slightly insane old gentleman, whose principal delusion was that the public was pining for a constant supply of the higher drama, more especially those specimens of the higher drama which flowed practically without cessation from the restless pen of the insane old gentleman himself, the Winter Theatre passed from hand to hand with the agility of a gold watch and a gathering of race-course thieves. The one anxiety of the unhappy man who found himself, by some accident, in possession of the Windsor Theatre was to pass it on to somebody else. The only really permanent tenant it ever had was the representative of the official receiver. Various causes were assigned for the phenomenal ill luck of the theatre, but undoubtedly the final objection to it as a temple of drama lay in the fact that nobody could ever find a place where it was hidden. Cabmen shook their heads on the rare occasions when they were asked to take a fare there. Explorers to the home of stroll through the Australian bush with child's play have been known to spend an hour on this trail and finish up at the point where they started. It was precisely this quality of elusiveness which had first attracted Mr. Montague. He was a far-seeing man, and to him the topographical advantages of the theatre were enormous. It was further from a far station than any other building of the same insurance value in London, even without having regard to the mystery which enveloped its whereabouts. Often after a good dinner he would lean back comfortably in his chair and see in the smoke of his cigar a vision of his Windsor Theatre blazing merrily, while distracted firemen galloped madly over London, vainly endeavouring to get someone to direct him to the scene of the conflagration. So Mr. Montague bought the theatre for a mere song and prepared to get busy. Unlucky for him, the representatives of the various fire offices for which he had effected his policies got busy first. A generous fellow insisted upon taking off his shoulders the burden of maintaining the firemen whose permanent presence in the theatre is required by law. Nothing would satisfy them but to install firemen of their own and pay their salaries. This, to a man in whom the instincts of the phoenix were so strongly developed as they were in Mr. Montague, was definitely disconcerting. He saw himself making no profit on the deal, a thing which had never happened to him before. And then Roland Blake occurred, and Mr. Montague's belief that his race was really chosen was restored. He sold the Windsor Theatre to Roland for £25,000, with £50,000 more than he himself had given for it, and this very satisfactory profit mitigated the slight regret he felt when it came to transferring from Roland to the insurance policies. To have effected policies amounting to rather more than £70,000 on a building so notoriously valueless as the Windsor Theatre had been an achievement of which Montague was justly proud, and it seemed sad to him that so much earnest endeavour should be thrown away. Over the little lunch with which she kindly allowed Roland to entertain her, to celebrate the purchase of the theatre, Miss Verpoint outlined her policy. "Well, we must put up at that theatre," she announced, "is a review." "A review," repeated Miss Verpoint, making, as she spoke, little calculations on the back of the menu. "We could run for about 1,500 a week, or say 2,000. Saying 2,000, thought Roland to himself, was not quite the same as paying 2,000, so why should she stint herself? "I know two boys who could write us a topping review," said Miss Verpoint. "They spite themselves, too, if it's for me. They're in love with me, both of them. We're better get in touch with them at once." To Roland, there seemed to be something just the least bit sinister about the sound of that word touch, but he said nothing. Why, there they are. Uh, Lunching over there, cried Miss Fairpoint, pointing to a neighboring table. Now, wasn't that lucky? To Roland, the luck was not quite so apparent, but he made no demur to Miss Fairpoint's suggestion they should be brought over to their table. The two boys, as to whose capacities to write a topping review Miss Fairpoint informed so optimistic an estimate, proved to be well-grown lads of about 45 and 40, respectively. Of the two, Roland thought that perhaps R.D. de Paris was a shade the more obnoxious, but the closer inspection left him feeling these fine distinctions were a little unfair with men of such equal talents. Bronham roads ran his fence so close it was practically a dead heat. They were both fat and somewhat bulgy-eyed. This was due to the fact that what review writing extracts from his experiments is a constant simulation of food and drink. Bronham Rose had the largest appetite in London. On the other hand, R.D. de Paris was a better drinker. Well, dear old thing, said Bronham. Well, old child, said R.D. Both these remarks were addressed to Miss Fairpoint. The talented parrot appeared to be unaware of Roland's existence. Miss Fairpoint struck the business note. Now you stop, boy, she said. Tie weights to yourself and sink down into those chairs. I want you two lads to write a review for me. Delighted, said Bronham. But first, there's a trifling matter to be raised first, said R.D. Where's the money coming from? My friend Mr. Bleak is putting up the money, said Miss Fairpoint with dignity. He has taken the Windsor Theatre. The initiative of the two auditors and their host, till then languid, increased with a jerk. Has he? By Jove, they cried. We must get together and talk this over. It was Roland's first experience of theatrical talking over, and he never forgot it. Two such talkers as these two were scarcely to be found in the lengths and breadths of theatrical London. Nothing, it seemed, could the gifted pair even begin to think of doing without first discussing the proposition in all its aspects. The amount of food which Roland found himself compelled to absorb during the course of these debates was appalling. Discussion could begin at lunch, but continued until it was time to order dinner. And then, as likely as not, they would have to sit there till supper time in order to thrash the question thoroughly out. The collection of a cast was a matter even more complicated than the actual composition of the review. There was the almost insuperable difficulty that Miss Fairpoint firmly vetoed every name suggested. It seemed practically impossible to find any man or woman in all of England or America whose peculiar gifts or lack of them would not interfere with Miss Fairpoint's giving a satisfactory performance of the principal role. It was all very perplexing to Roland, but as Miss Fairpoint was an expert in his theatrical manners, he scarcely felt entitled to question her views. It was about this time that Roland proposed to Miss Fairpoint. The passage of time and the strain of talking of a review had, to a certain extent, moderated his original fervor. He shaded off from a passionate devotion, through various diminishing tints of regard for her, into a sort of pale sunset glow of affection. His principal reason for proposing was that it seemed to him to be the natural order of events. Her air toward him had become distinctly proprietorial. She now called him roly-poly in public, a proceeding was legend with mixed feelings. Also, she had taken to ordering him about, which, as everybody knows, is an unmistakable sign of affection among ladies of the theatrical profession. Finally, in a chivalrous way, Roland had begun to feel a little apprehensive lest he might be compromising her. Everybody knew he was putting up the money for the review in which she was to appear. They were constantly seen together at restaurants. People looked arch when they spoke to him about her. Had asked himself, was he behaving like a perfect gentleman? The answer was in the negative. He took a capture flag and proposed before he could repent of his decision. She accepted him. He was not certain for a moment whether he was glad or sorry. But I don't want to get married, she said, until I've justified my choice of a profession. You'll have to wait until I've made a success in this review. Roland was shocked to find himself hugely relieved at this concession. The review took shape. There did apparently exist a handful of artistes to whom Miss Fairpoint had no objection, and these, a scrubby but confident lot, were promptly engaged. Several Americans sprang from nowhere with songs, dances, and ideas for effects. Tousled-haired scenic artists wandering with model scenes on their arms. A great cloud of chorus ladies settled upon the theater like flies. Even uh, Brahman Rose and R.D. de Paris, those human pythons, show signs of activity. They caught Roland one day near Swans and Eggers, steering him into the Piccadilly Grill and over a hearty lunch, reading extracts from a brown paper covered manuscript which they informed him was the first act. It looked a battered sort of manuscript, and indeed it had every right to be. Under various titles and at various times, it had been refused by practically every responsible manager in London. As "Oh, what a life," it had failed to satisfy the directors of the Empire. Rechristened "Wow Wow," it had been rejected by the Alhambra. The Hippodrome refused to consider it, even in the name of "Hello, Cedar Flap." It was now called "Pass Along, Please," and according to its authors, was a real review. Roland was to learn, as the days went on, that in the world in which he was moving, everything was real review, and there was not a stunt or a corking effect. He fired in a sea of real review, stunts, and corking effects. As far as he could gather, the main difference between these things was that real review was something which had been stolen from some previous English production, whereas the stunt or corking effect was something which had been looted from New York. A judicious blend of these, if you can understand, constituted the sort of thing the public wanted. Rehearsals began before, in Roland's opinion, his little army was properly supplied with ammunition. True, they had the first act, but even the authors agreed that it wanted bringing up to date in parts. They explained that it was, in a manner of speaking, their life work. They had apparently started it about 10 years ago when they were careless lads. Inevitably, it was spotted here and there with smart tropical hits of the early years of the century, but that, they said, wouldn't be all right. They could freshen up in a couple of evenings. It was simply a matter of deleting allusions to pro-Boers and of substituting lines about Marconi shares and mango wurzels. It'll be all right, they assured Roland. This is real review. In times of trouble, there's always a point to which one may say, here's the beginning of the end. This point came with Roland at the commencement of the rehearsals. Till then, he had not fully realized the terrible nature of production with which he made himself responsible. Moreover, it was rehearsals that gave him his first clear insight into the character of Miss Verpoint. Miss Verpoint was not at her best at rehearsals. For the first time as he watched her, Roland found himself feeling there was a case to be made out for the managers who had so consistently left her in the background. Miss Verpoint, to use the technical term, threw her weight about. There were not many good lines of script of Act 1 to pass along, please. But such as there were, she reached out for and grabbed away from their owners, who retired in the corners, scowling and muttering like dogs robbed of bones. She snubbed everybody, Roland included. Roland sat in the cold darkness of the stalls and watched her, panic-stricken. Like an icy wave it had swept over him what marriage with this girl would mean. He suddenly realized how essentially domestic his instincts really were. Life in Miss Verpoint would mean perpetual dinners at restaurants, bread-serving suppers, motor rides, everything he hated most. Yet as a man of honor, he was tied to her. His review was a success, she would marry him, and reviews, he knew, were always successful. The very moment there were 6 best reviews in London, running at various theatres. He shuddered at the thought that in a few weeks there would be 7. He felt a longing for rural solitude. He wanted to be alone by himself for a day or two in a place where there were no papers with advertisements or reviews, no grill rooms, and above all, no Miss Billy Verpoint. That night he stole away to a Norfolk village, where in happier days he had once spent a summer holiday. A peaceful, primitive place where the inhabitants could not have told real review from a corking effect. Here, for the space of a week, Roland lay in hiding, while his quivering nerves gradually recovered tone. He returned a little happier, but a little apprehensive. Beyond a brief telegram of farewell, he had not communicated with Miss Thorne for 7 days, an experience that made him be aware that he was a lady who demanded a certain amount of attention. That his nervous system was not wholly restored to health was borne in upon him as he walked along Piccadilly on the way to his flat. For when somebody suddenly slapped him hard between the shoulder blades, He uttered a stifled yell and leaped into the air. Turning to face his assailant, he found himself meeting the genial gaze of Mr. Montague, his predecessor in the ownership of the Windsor Theatre. Mr. Montague was effusively friendly, for some mysterious reason, congratulatory. "You've done it, have you? You pulled it off, did you? In the first month. By George. And I took you for the plain, ordinary mug of commerce. My boy, you're as deep as they make them. Who would have thought it to look at you? It's the greatest deal anyone ever had, and it's staring me in the face all the time. I never saw it. But I don't grudge it to you. You deserve it, my boy. You're a nut." "I really don't know what you mean." "Quite right, my boy," chuckled Mr. Montague. "You're quite right to keep it up, even among friends. It doesn't do to risk anything, and the least said, soonest mended." He went on his way, leaving Roland completely mystified. Voices from his sitting room, among which he recognized the high notes of Miss Verpoint, reminding him of the ordeal before him. He entered what he hoped was a careless ease of manner, but his heart was beating fast. Since the opening rehearsals he had acquired a wholesome respect for Miss Verpoint's tongue. She was sitting in his favorite chair. There were also present Burnham Rhodes and R.D. DeParis, who had made themselves completely at home with a couple of his cigars and whiskey from the oldest bin. "So we're here at last," said Miss Verpoint. "The valet told us you were expected back this morning, so we waited. Where on earth have you been to, running away like this, without a word?" "I only went—" "Well, it doesn't matter where you went. The main point is, what are you going to do about it?" "We thought we'd better come along and talk it over." "Talk over what?" said Roland. "Oh, don't try to be funny, for goodness sake," snapped Miss Verpoint. "It doesn't suit you. You haven't the right shape of head. What do you suppose you want to talk over? The theatre, of course." "What about the theatre?" Miss Verpoint looked searchingly at him. "Don't you ever read the papers?" "I haven't seen a paper since I went away." "Well, better have it quick and not waste time breaking it gently," said Miss Verpoint. "The theatre's been burned down. That's what happened." "Burned down?" "Burned down. That's what I said, didn't I? The suffragettes did it. They left copies of Vote for Women about the place. Silly asses set fire to two of the theaters as well, but they happened to be main thoroughfares, and the fire brigade got them under control at once. I suppose they couldn't find the Windsor. Anyhow, it's burned to the ground, and what I want to know is, what are you going to do about it?" Roland was much too busy blessing the good angels of Kingsway to uh, reply at once. R.D. DeParis, sympathetic soul, placed a wrong construction on his silence. "Poor Rowley," he said, "it's quite broken him up. The best we can do all is to go off and talk it over at Savoy, over a bit of lunch." "Well," said Miss Verpoint, "what are you going to do? Rebuild the Windsor, or try to get another theatre?" The officers were all for rebuilding the Windsor. True, it would take time, but it would be more satisfaction in every way. Besides, at this time of year, it would be no easy matter to secure another theatre at a moment's notice. To the writers, the destruction of Windsor Theatre had appeared less in the light of a disaster than a direct intervention on the part of Providence. The completion of that tiresome second act, which had brooded over the lives with an ugly cloud, could now be postponed indefinitely. "Of course," said R.P. DeParis thoughtfully, "a contract with you makes it obligatory on you to produce our review by a certain date, but I dare say, Barnum, we can meet Roland there, couldn't we?" "Sure," said Roland. "Something nominal, say a further 500 on account of fees would satisfy us. Certainly think it would be better to rebuild the Windsor, don't you?" "I agree. See, really, our review has been written to fit the Windsor. Very difficult to alter for production at another theatre." There was a pause. "What do you think, roly-poly?" asked Miss Verpoint, as Roland made no sign. "Nothing would delight me more to rebuild the Windsor, or to take another theatre, or anything to oblige," she said cheerfully. "Unfortunately, I have no more money to burn." It was as if a bomb had suddenly exploded in the room. A dreadful silence fell upon his hearers. For the moment no one spoke. R.D. DeParis woke with a start out of a bewildered dream of prawn curry, and Bronner rose forget he had not tasted food for nearly 2 hours. Verpoint was the first to break the silence. "Do you mean to say," she gasped, "you didn't insure the place?" Roland shook his head. The particular form in which Verpoint had put the question entirely, he felt, to make this answer. Why didn't you? Miss Fairpoint's tone was almost menacing. Because it did not appear to be necessary. Nor was it necessary, said Roland to his conscience. Mr. Montague had done all the sharing that was necessary, and had been over. Miss Fairpoint fought with her growing indignation and lost. What about the salaries that the people have been rehearsing all this time? She demanded. I'm sorry that she bad of engagement. It was scarcely my fault. However, I propose to give each of them a month's salary. I can manage that, I think. Miss Fairpoint rose. What about me? What about me? That's what I want to know. What do I get off? Think I'm going to marry you when actually going to the theater and putting up this review? You're jolly well mistaken. Roland made a gesture which was intended to convey regret and resignation. He even contrived to sigh. Very well then, said Miss Fairpoint, rightfully interpreting this behavior as his final pronouncement on the situation. Then everything's jolly well off. She swept out of the room, the other two authors following in her wake like porpoises behind a liner. Roland went to his bureau, unlocked it, and took out a bundle of documents. He let his fingers stray lovingly among the fire insurance policies which energetic Mr. Montague had been at such pains to secure from so many companies. And so, he said softly to himself, am I. End of part 3.